Hi, this is Kathy from Gadgets Top 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at my currently inked pens. I've got a Pilot E95S with a 14 karat fine nib, a Lamy logo with a 14 karat extra fine nib. That's not the nib that came on it. That's a nib that I took off of a Lamy Studio and put on this nib. And I've also got a Jinhao X750 that has a nib that I've modified myself. Now this one has been inked up for a while, and I'll be doing writing samples with these two and maybe with this one if I got enough ink in it to write. I'll be writing in my old Hobonichi with cream colored 52 GSM paper. I'm going to begin with my E95S. Like I mentioned, it has a 14 karat fine nib, and I've got it inked up with Herbin L'Armée de Cassis. This is one of my favorite inks to use in this pen. I'm really enjoying this pen and ink combo. It's not matchy-matchy, but they just look so good together. And this ink really performs well in a wet writing pilot nib, or really any wet writing nib. I guess it has just a touch of that halo effect. It just has some really nice character, and it's very pleasant to write with. This pen is a nice reverse writer, and if I remember correctly, I've done a little bit of smoothing on it, but it's not just how smooth the reverse writing is, the ink flow is nice and uniform. So this is a nice, versatile nib to write with. I've enjoyed journaling with this nib, and I'm also tutoring a young man a couple times a week, and I've been using this pen for a couple of our tutoring sessions now, and it's just been a joy to write with it. I'm discovering this pen again since I've discovered a couple of inks that I really enjoy writing with it. One of the issues I've had with this pen is I always would get ink on my thumb. This seam right here, I guess as I would write, I would always creep down, and then I would end up with tons of ink on my thumb, and that hasn't happened in a long time. I think I've trained myself to hold the pen up higher, and I'm just really enjoying this pen now. I couldn't decide whether to ink up my E95S or my Lamy logo. These both have really enjoyable nibs that I enjoy writing with, so I went ahead and inked up both. I tried to find an ink that would complement the L'Armée de Cassis, and I thought a brown ink would look good. Now, Jupiter Flyby is an ink that I didn't like when I first got it. This ink came in the Voyager set, the Colorverse Voyager set, and when I first tried it, I really didn't like it. I thought of it as more of just a yucky pink color, but I saw Wasky Squirrel using it in a wetter writing nib, and he described it as a pleasant chocolatey brown. So when I tried it in my Lamy logo with the gold nib, I discovered, yeah, this is a much more pleasant ink to use. This is a nice pen and ink combination. Like I mentioned before, this is a 14 karat extra fine nib, but this is a nib that I took off of my Lamy Studio, and I gave the Lamy Studio to my sister. It was the palladium finish, and the section just didn't work for me. Now this gold extra fine nib. I don't know if you can see. I may try to zoom in editing, but this has a slight architect character to it that I really enjoy. And this nib is just very soft. Now you can see that this nib is not a good reverse writer. It's just too dry. It's very scratchy, but it's so dry that I have never even tried to smooth it out because it would be no use. There's not enough ink flow. But the nib itself in regular writing is nice and wet. So this, what I thought was an unpleasant color of the ink, looks pretty nice when writing with this nib. Both of these nibs are nice and wet, so they're a joy to use. This one is a bit more crisp. This one, the ink, you feel like you're writing with a wetter nib. Since this one has that architect character, it puts down the ink in a way that it looks more crisp and precise. This nib, everyone talks about the E95S having kind of a soft, bouncy nib, but this nib, makes the E95S feel like a nail. This is a very soft, bouncy nib, and I'm not as fond of using this nib for note taking. I tend to prefer it for journaling because I'm writing a bit slower. I'm not in a hurry. If I'm note taking, or like I said, using this pen for tutoring, I'm writing a bit faster. I tend to be someone who puts a death grip on a pen, and I would be afraid of maybe putting too much pressure on this nib. But for journaling, I really enjoy this. Now, I found these two inks don't really complement each other that well. So when I'm writing in my journal, I have a 5 line, or some lines a day, Leuchtturm. I love that journal. I'm about to finish up my first year. So usually when I have a couple of pens inked up, I'll alternate days writing. Well, since these two don't look that great together, I do one full spread with the E95S, and then I'll do the next 2 days, 2-page spread with the Lamy logo. And these are just a joy to use. One thing I want to mention about my Lamy logo, I know Lamy logos don't get talked about that much, and I think it's because the ones that are regularly available are just bare metal pens. You can get one that is a brushed metal. I think they're both stainless steel, and one that's not brushed. And I don't think I would like those as well. I have this one that I got a few years ago that has a kind of a pearl lacquer finish. It's kind of, I don't know if you can see it. There's just the slightest bit of texture to it. Not bad, but it gives it a grippiness. That lacquer gives it a grippiness that I really enjoy. It came in this color and like a really dark purpley blue color. I kind of wish I would have gotten one of each because these aren't very expensive pens. I think these are cheaper than the Lamy CP1. These were in the 50 something dollar range, where when I got my CP1, I think it was 70 something dollars. And I love the clip on this. The trim is just really nice looking. Now, this back part is plastic, chrome colored plastic. So in theory, you should be able to post it. You can see the little nubs here. that are stops that you should be able to post it, but fortunately, before I attempted it, I read from other people that when you post it, this metal cap will scratch up the chrome, so I never have attempted it. It would be nice to be able to post. It would be kind of long like the CP1, but it's very usable, at least for my small hands, without posting. Okay, and finally, I've got my Jinhao X750 that I made a reverse fude, or sometimes I've seen these called a Concord nib. Let me see if this still writes. No, it is dried up, but I'll go ahead and show on the previous page. I have a writing sample. And I was able to get, when you reverse write, it's basically a broad, and then the regular writing looks like it's probably a medium nib. And I've enjoyed journaling with this pen. I've got it inked up with Pannonia Cheerio Water Bus. I'll show the color here. It's kind of a teal base ink with a turquoise or a blue pigment. I'll show the bottle. Yeah, Mike from Ink Dependence did a collaboration, and this ink is called Cheerio Water Bus. I've really enjoyed it in this pen. This isn't a pen that I take out and about. I mostly just use it for journaling, and like I mentioned, in tutoring, I used it in several tutoring sessions, and it was a joy to use. In my water resistance test that I showed, the pigment part of the ink is kind of a powder baby blue, and the base of the ink I think must be more of a turquoisey or a teal colored dye. Now, one thing I noticed with this is that as I used this pen, I was seeing less of the green teal ink. Let's see, this is a writing sample that I did with shortly after I inked up the pen. Like all of this down to the smiley face is kind of I'm seeing a teal color. But then I went back after I had used almost all of the ink in the pen and did a little scribble, did this loop-de-loop and the vertical and horizontal lines, and they look more turquoise, almost completely blue. It looks like a completely different ink. Now, I did put some little ball bearings, stainless steel ball bearings in my converter, and anytime before I would write, I would just do a little shake. These are about the same size as the ones that you find in a Pilot Con 40 converter, and they have done the trick. I put 4 of them in there. The Pilot Con 40 has 4, so I put 4 in here because I thought as the ball bearings are down here when you're writing, I didn't want them to block up the ink flow, so I thought they would form kind of a ring and leave that middle channel open. And it seemed to work pretty well. It kept the pigment mixed up fairly well. I had no issues with hard starts. The first time I used this ink was in my Leonardo Memento Zero, and down toward the end of the ink fill, I did experience some hard starts, but there's no, let me see, is there an ink agitator? Let me check. Okay, let's see, let me back up a little bit. Yeah, I couldn't remember. There's no ink agitator in this one. So if I ever use this ink, Pannonia Cheerio Water Bus, in a pen without an ink agitator, I will definitely put some of these ball bearings in it just to make sure. Because I didn't mention this, but the dye in this ink settles out like shimmer does in a shimmer ink, and it's a little bit more difficult to get reincorporated than shimmer is in my experience. So it's nice to have an ink agitator just to kind of help reincorporate it before you start writing. Okay, I showed the water resistance test for Cheerio Water Bus. Let me go ahead and show for Jupiter Flyby. This kind of surprised me. There's a lot of red that stays behind. I guess you can recover what you've written, but that red really spreads. So the kind of water resistance that I prefer is one like this Diatramentus elderberries, which is a burgundy purpley kind of ink. I love when you have a nice crisp black or gray water resistant layer. That is very readable. And here is a previous water resistance test that I did for Larmée de Cassis. You can see a lot of the red came out and there's a lot of blue or purple left behind. And it's slightly water resistant. You can kind of recover what you've written, but I prefer having a gray underlayer. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.